We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Summer Coxe. She's the Director of Human Resources at Astellas Pharma. Summer, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question of what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes, Christina. Well, thanks for having me. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I will say, when I was a child, I had this, probably like any other kid, right? I had pretty limited, I would say, role models. I grew up really being I was the first person in my family to go to college. So education was a big deal. So I grew up wanting to be a school teacher, right? That was kind of like my first role model growing up. And now I look back and I was like, I don't know what I was thinking, because I could never be a school teacher. I don't have the patience for it. I think about my child's teachers and I have so much admiration for them. I'm like, oh, thank you so much for doing that very, very, very hard job that you do. And I admire them so much for having the character traits that they have to do that job.
I love that answer. I still keep in touch with some of my teachers, and I think they have such a huge role to play as well. Fast forward to today as Director of Human Resources and really thinking through, especially the last few years, it's in the title of our interview series, a company's culture, what it feels like to work there. I want to talk about, with all of the changes happening in the workplace, folks are really looking for a positive, empowering company culture, and it's being sought out than ever before. When you're thinking about the easiest way to improve upon company culture, is it really to identify and remove those workplace issues? Why or why not?
So I don't think changing company culture is easy at all. I actually think it's a relatively hard thing to change, and I think it's because it's really part of it's built up of your shared values, right? It's really kind of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's that question for a company, right? That's what a company culture is really made of. And so for me, I mean, going around and fixing workplace issues can help, but I don't think it's the fastest way to really move the culture, because the culture is made up of people, right? And the shared values. So really, it's really around honing in of, do you know what your shared values are? Do you know what grounds you together? Do you know what your rallying cry is, right? Do you know that thing that sort of bonds you together, right? And pulls you forward in a positive way? And do you have the right systems in place to kind of do that check and balance to make sure that you are all aligned and kind of moving in the right direction? Because cultures can move off course, right? They can kind of shift, and you do need ways to kind of pull them back on track. For me, it's almost like, you're a mammogram every year, or your 6-month, dental checkup. You go in there to sort of get those warning signs, right? Oh, something's not quite right. I need to do something. You need those systems in your workplace as well to sort of have a pulse on the culture, right? That's why, things like employee engagement surveys, feedback mechanisms within your company, just listening tours, right? Are your leaders tuned in to their employees? Are employees good at giving feedback? Do you have those systems in place to really understand, is everything working the way we want it to? So.
Absolutely. You have to have the systems in place. It's all about people and something that you are actively cultivating, keeping a pulse on. As people, we are learning every day in our jobs from our teams and coworkers. at the time of this recording, and it's the beginning of January. Summer, what is something, a key learning of 2022, and how has that influenced how you think about this year and 2023 strategy? And this can be anything.
Yeah, so for me, from a work perspective, I think, as a company, Astellas is sort of, on a transformation journey. And one of the things that I think for me personally, there's something to be said about sort of doing less to impact more, really focusing, because I think sometimes during transformation, you have a lot of ideas and there's really a lot to do. So you're doing, but are you really doing them well enough to get the impact that you want to have? So sometimes, really focusing in on the core things that are going to move the needle the most and doing those exceptionally well will have a bigger impact than actually doing more things. So for me, that's what I'm going to try to take into 2023, is to really make sure I'm prioritizing effectively, and really making sure that I am picking those most impactful things to have the most impact, right? Because I am sort of, like you said, everyone always has more to learn. Everyone always has more kind of to grow and to do. And so that's my goal for 2023, right? Try to do more with less. Let's put it that way.
Do more with less, and not everything can be a number one priority. So we're here to make, the biggest impact, really commit there, and also follow through too, because if you do too much, you're almost 100% likely to burn out and feel like you are really stressed, and that is not a fun feeling, and decreases productivity as well. We know that, in one study, 47% of employees reported that their stress was higher than anything they'd previously experienced in their career, and only 37% in that study really agreed that their organization understood what they needed both in their personal lives and for their families. I would love to know, how are you thinking about showing up for the full lives of employees at Astellas Pharma?
So, one of the things I really love about Astellas, and I've worked for some really great companies in my career, but Astellas truly is, I think, a people first company. And for example, this year we've newly within the U.S. instituted this concept of a summer break. So we've added 3 new holidays to the July 4th week. And that allows sort of employees, if they want to use 2 of their vacation days to that week, to have the whole week off. And then the whole company is sort of shutting down that week to truly allow people to kind of unplug and recharge. So I love that, because the worst thing is to go on vacation and be constantly worried about the number of emails you're going to have when you come back, or when you feel that pressure to like check your box to sort of cull it so that you won't feel that sort of fear or that dread of coming back to how many emails am I going to have to catch up on? How far behind am I going to have from my vacation? So that's one way Astellas is sort of investing this year into the lives of our employees to make sure that they have more time to spend with their families, more time to decompress, more time to manage their stress. Also, we really do have great benefits. We have mental health benefits. We have a standard EAP, but we also, have free access to Talkspace for our employees.
Yeah.
We have great access to mental health care for employees who need, just that extra support. Me, myself, even, right? If I, need to go talk to my counselor, I do that. Nothing wrong with it. Personally, think everybody probably should have one. It's a great resource just to kind of process through and figure out, are you doing all the right things that you need to do for you, right, in order to show up your best, right, and sort of give your best when you're at work, so that you really can shine, right, for the business and for your employees, right? So for me, I think those are some of the ways that Astellas is really trying to help address that issue, right, of kind of burnout, and stress, and that balance piece of people really trying to figure out, how do I manage the needs of my family, and my desire, right, to really deliver, right, for my corporation.
Yeah, absolutely. Emotional, physical, mental well-being is directly related to kind of how we show up at work every day, how you're interacting with people. You mentioned kind of a people first approach when you're thinking about creating a great place to work where people feel like they have the tools to succeed. And I appreciate your example of just having that time, that break. There is no worse feeling than having a day off, but you're getting emails and Slacks about, things that need to be done too. So is it really a day off? What are kind of other examples of what it looks like to really live and breathe in a people first or people centric work environment?
So I think I have good examples and I have bad examples, and unfortunately, right? But I think if you really are a company that is people centric, then as you make business decisions, because ultimately, right, we are businesses, that question of how will this decision impact my people is one of the questions that you ask yourself as you're making business decisions. Now, it's not the only question you ask yourself, right? I mean, of course, you ask questions of, is this going to help my sales revenue? Is this going to improve my cost structure? Is this going to, bring more products to patients, right? Is this going to, help my field sales force, better bring more product to market? Whatever those questions are, you ask those questions. But one of the questions you ask is, how is this going to impact my employees, right? And that question is a key decision that you think about as you make those decisions. And if a business does that, and the answer to that one question, right, weighs heavily on their mind as they're making those decisions, then that's a people-centric company, right? Because they're really thinking about, what is the impact to my people as I do this, right? And if the impact to their people is too great, then they're like, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's not something we can do. I remember there was a time when I was working at Hewlett Packard, and it was back, it's a long time ago, but it was when Mark Hurd was the CEO. And it was, really that time when it was a very cost-cutting philosophy. We really weren't investing much in growth, but we were really trying to just cut to meet the numbers. And it really was a time where there was a question asked of, okay, so we're behind on the numbers. Are we gonna, how about, well, we can still cut merit increases, right? We can do that. We can do that, and we can make the numbers. And we ended up cutting the budget for merit increases.
Yeah.
That was not a people-centric environment, right? When you make that decision, right, to kind of meet Wall Street numbers, that's not a people-centric environment, and I have another good example, right, where you can have that, you can still cut costs and it still be a people-centric decision. So when I was working at Alcon and we were doing transformation, and one of the kind of tenets was we needed to save money, or we wanted to save money, right, as we sort of spun off from Novartis and we got onto our own benefits packages.
Yeah.
And benefits for vision care was one of the ones where we were kind of rebidding our benefits. We had a choice to move to a new vision care provider, right? And it was going to save us money. And the question was, okay, so what does this mean for our employees, right? It's going to save us money, but what does it mean for our employees? Well, we doubled the number of providers they got to go to, right? It didn't cost them any more from a cost perspective. Well, that's a win for our employees, right? So that's a people-centric environment. Yes, they saved money, but our employees actually got double the number of providers they could go to, It wasn't going to cost them more from a, you know, employee contribution standpoint. So that's actually a win. The
Yeah.
company saved money, but it's a win for our employees. So that's a yes, right? So it can go both ways. It's just how companies make decisions and how they use that question, right?
Absolutely. And remembering to ask that question too, understanding that employees are key stakeholders in the organization, working with customers, potential employees, and really everybody at the organization as well. And when you're testing new, programs and you are getting that feedback on the product from employees as well, you need to have that trust built and feel like you can trust your manager and your team. What are the ways that you continue to cultivate and actively build that trust with employees?
So I do think the trust equation is something that we've all sort of been living with for a really long time, and I do think it's a matter of, like, do you have a relationship with your employees? Do you do are you reliable, right? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you follow through? When you say you're going to do something, do you turn around and do you do it? So
Yeah.
do you live up to your commitments, right? I think, are you transparent with information? Do you treat people right with the type of, I think, care and respect that you would expect, right, for someone to treat you with? And if you do, then you start to build that trust, right?
Mhm.
I think what breaks down that trust relationship is when you say you're going to do something and then you don't follow through, or something doesn't come to fruition that you said would. And then either you don't communicate clearly and transparently, you don't communicate the reasons why, right? And you don't treat I always say, you don't treat people like adults, right? I think that when we start to be too protective of our employees, right? And when we start to kind of like, okay, well, we can't say that because we're kind of fearful of their reaction, and so we hold information back. Then what starts to happen is they start to fill in that story, right? In a void, they're always going to fill in the story, and half the time they're going to fill in the story with a story that's worse than the actual story. And so the more transparent we can be, the more authentic, the more we can give them the context, so we can give them the why around why decisions are made, right? I think the more understanding employees are, they're adults, right? They understand that sometimes businesses have to make tough decisions and they may not like it, right? Because nobody likes when, people don't get what they want, or, it doesn't go the way that they want it to. But if you can give them, right, kind of the rationale and the logic and kind of how you made your decision, at least then they get it, right? And people can sort of say, well, I may not like it, but at least I understand it. And then, then people can move forward with that. It's when you don't give them any of that, and then they're making up the worst possible kind of like evil scenario in their mind, right? It's like all of a sudden, then you become like the supervillain, right? And being the supervillain is not something that you want to be,
Yeah, the unknown is scary, and you think about all the different scenarios and really leading with that honesty and transparency as much as possible, and really, effectively communicating with your team is really important to building that trust and not making decisions on how people are going to feel for anyone as well. Again, treating people like adults, as you were talking about too. Once you kind of have that open line of communication, a lot of folks, the first person they build trust with is their manager. When you think about that relationship, how do you advise managers to really collect feedback and really, what you're talking about, activate, act on, follow up for those results?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Has there ever been a time where you were surprised by employee feedback? And if so, how did you respond?
So I've gotten lots of feedback over my many years of doing this. And so I always try to hold a poker face. I never try to kind of respond with surprise. I always try to listen, right, and try to understand. I've certainly had situations where you get two very different sides of a story, two very different perspectives. And that's normal, that's human, right? Where one person interpreted a situation this way and another person interpreted a situation in an entirely different way. And that just sort of comes to that age-old scenario where, sort of perception is reality, and people's perceptions can be completely different. And it's often when you just have to really start to ask a lot of questions and get very curious. To me, that piece of curiosity and really trying to understand, so where is that person coming from? What were they thinking? What was in their head? What could have triggered that? And sort of coming at it from the place of not making assumptions about anything is how I generally approach those situations, because we all sort of come at things with our own biases and our own sense of interpretation. And that's often how I approach those situations.
Yeah, it's important to come in with that open-minded kind of mindset, ask questions, ask for context, not making assumptions. And then the more times you ask for feedback, you're listening, you're better at it. It's like any other skill too. I want to ask more generally, so not necessarily internally, but are there any common mistakes you're seeing companies making, especially today as we're innovating in their human resources or people strategy as well?
I think people are trying to move very fast right now. And that's just kind of, I think, the nature of the world right now. We're trying to go very fast. And sometimes when we try to go very fast, sometimes we don't stop and pause enough.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't stop and maybe use our ears enough. Ask enough questions, make enough space for the quieter people, make enough space for perhaps those who need more time, right? Or, when you think about diversity and inclusion in different cultures, I think particularly with a US culture or a global company, many other cultures, are not as vocal or as, I would say, open, forceful out there as Americans are. And sometimes we need to pause and take a step back and make space for that. Because sometimes I think we miss some very valid, good ideas because we do that.
Absolutely. Not everyone feels, empowered to speak up in front of 200 people or on the first day give feedback to, an executive, CEO as well. Really opening up a space for everybody to contribute and be really thoughtful, intentional is so important as well. Summer, is there anything that I did not ask that you want to share with folks listening, or any kind of key insights you hope people bring with them after hearing our conversation today?
I think since we were really talking about kind of like this culture change, just transformation, and how kind of, change is inevitable, right?
Yeah.
And it really isn't going to stop. So I think this concept of how do you build your own resilience is something that I really love to ponder, and I encourage other people to ponder. Because I think one of the things that I really want to focus on or work on cracking the nut, right, is how do I help people who struggle a bit more with change than I do. Like I'm just one of those people who is super adaptable, right? But there are others, right, who really struggle with it. And the world is just going to keep giving it to them, right? Um, and so, how do we kind of build some of those tools and muscles to help it be less uncomfortable for them?
Mhm.
And so that's the piece I want people to kind of take away is how do you work on that for yourselves, right? Because I do think it's not going to stop. And for me, I think it's, how do you become more comfortable being uncomfortable?
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that as well. Summer, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in giving employees a safe space to always speak up and know it's important for employees and employers to be seen and heard and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.